case student, so this is extract 5 from the case study, structural issues in the Zambian economy. It's in 2 parts. We'll start with the first part because this part is really related to the demand side of the economy. And it's looking at kind of the broader issues. It starts off with, compared with the rest of Africa, the Zambian economy has enjoyed much more stable economic growth. Just to kind of remind ourselves of the benefits of economic growth, what we're kind of looking at essentially is those 3 economic agents of the government, households and businesses, and the benefits and costs that they may gain from economic growth. Maybe a small mark question on this may be able to be incorporated into other questions. So the government essentially benefits in terms of a fiscal dividend, where the tax revenue it gains is greater than the government spending. This can allow an increase, especially for a developing economy, of spend on public goods, and 2 specific ones of education and healthcare will benefit the HDI. On the negative side, it may create negative externalities, and that is a good link with your micro graph for a negative externality. And this will lead to defensive government spending, because the unsustainable nature of resource use, and in this example copper, will lead to increased spending by the government to solve environmental problems in the future. And there's an opportunity cost because this money is not productively being used to increase consumer standards of living. In terms of households, you're going to have from the greater disposable income related to the reduction in unemployment or higher wages. And this will allow consumers to buy more goods and services, which will increase their material well-being or their standard of living. On a negative side, it may create some demand pull inflation, and this will reduce consumers' purchasing power, and that will reduce their standard of living, as they will potentially be less able to consume goods and services. In terms of businesses, they will have to raise their output to meet increasing demand, and this will increase their revenues and profits, which can allow them to generate retained profit and create further investment in the long term, or pay dividends to their shareholders. In terms of a negative to a business, it may lead to cost push inflation as the wage rises due to becoming close to full capacity. Or if you want to make it a micro, you could talk about maybe diseconomies of scale within that. So there's a quick link to costs and benefits of economic growth in that first part. It then talks about less affected by global financial and economic crisis of 2007-2008. The reasons for that are that their economy is reliant on other developing economies. So their main export markets for the raw materials of copper are other developing economies which process copper, such as China, and their demand was maintained to an extent because of the size of their economy, and also that they weren't affected by the global economic crisis as well. It was mostly in the developed economies. Since 2009, economic growth in Zambia has averaged over 6%, so they have quite rapid economic growth. And inflation has fallen from around 10 to 6.5 in 2013. So again, you've got some costs and benefits of a slowdown in inflation. The slowdown in inflation, so from 10% on the rate of inflation to 6.5%, will increase consumers' purchasing power, as the value of money is more likely to be maintained. This will encourage savings, as people will have more confidence that the money they save will be worth more in the future. It will also mean that the relative price of Zambia's exports will become more competitive. It will also give the exchange rate greater stability and hopefully strengthen it to an extent. And this will improve their terms of trade, which may help to improve their trade balance. On the negative side, the slowdown in the rate of inflation will maintain some of the debt levels. So whereas it benefits savers, borrowers lose out to an extent because inflation can reduce the size of borrowings as it tends to inflate wages. Inflation also inflates asset prices. So the asset price rises may slow down, and this may discourage people from investing in assets. Also, it may coincide with a slowdown in growth. So lower inflation may be also a sign that growth is slowing, and potentially for a developing economy. That might not be a good thing. Now, in terms of it depends upon, it's kind of the rate of growth in inflation. As long as it's less than the rate of growth in real wages, then standards of living are rising. Also, it depends upon the quality of goods and services that are being sold. As long as incomes are rising and more manufactured or luxury goods are being produced, then you can justify higher wages and prices in the economy. Okay, so that was two key things from that first paragraph. Then it talks about the tripling of global copper prices from 2009 to 2011 had a significant impact on production in the mining sector. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that there is an increase in investment in the mining sector. So I'll put a question mark next to this. What it means is that there's an increase in output. And this may just be from using up capacity that was already there. And we'll have a look a little bit further down when we get to it about some information that might help with that. The next paragraph talks about Zambia has gone somewhere in reducing its dependence on private and public sector consumption. So private sector is the C, public sector consumption is part of the G, and it's current spending. So spending on subsidies, spending on public sector wages, towards a greater reliance on private sector investment. For a developing economy, a lot of this is potentially FDI as well. However, the growth rate of private sector investment fell after 2010. So there's a key bit of information at the top here, which is kind of leading up to 2009 as being the key part of the economy. But then there is a period up to 2013. So it's saying that the growth in private sector investment is fell after 2010. So something happened in 2010 or before that, which reduced the amount of FDI or investment available. The growth of public sector investment has increased. So the Zambian government is building more infrastructure or more capital spending since 2010. The composition of aggregate demand and the contribution made to GDP by consumption, investment and net trade is shown in figure 5.1. So here we have figure 5.1. One key part is that the first part of the table is looking up to from 2001 to 2009. The second part of the table is two different charts, but looking from 2010 to 2012. The reason for this is the differences in the figures. So if we go down the side here, you've got components of aggregate demand, gross capital formation, consumption and external sector. This is a little bit different in terms of structure to our C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Gross capital formation on a big scale is I, consumption would be C and external sector would be X minus M. But as they've broken it down differently, the G goes into the I and the C. So here, part of the gross capital formation or investment is public sector investment. So that's government capital spending. The private sector is the I in our CIG. Consumption again is broken down into public, which would be current spending. And private, which is household spending or consumption. Now, the key change from 2001 to 2009 is around the amount of private sector investment. So the investment in total doesn't change hugely as a percentage from 18 to 21, but within that there is a very sharp decrease in public sector and a big increase in private sector, and a lot of that is foreign direct investment into the mining sector. Within the consumption, again, there's about a doubling of the public sector and a significant drop in private sector spending. So a lot of extra current spending in relation to what it was before, and potentially either the same or it just hasn't grown to the same extent in terms of the private sector investment. Within the external sector, it goes from being a drag on economic growth or aggregate demand of negative 16.2 to a positive. So it's going from a trade deficit to a trade surplus in 2009. And the big reason for this is the increase in the value of exports, but the bigger reason is there's an even bigger fall in imports. So whereas there's a positive in exports, the bigger fall in imports has cancelled it out. So it's a positive, a rebalancing of Zambia's economy towards private sector investment, a positive trade balance, and less reliance or consumption becoming less significant to the economy. So it's kind of a positive picture up till 2009. After 2009, so from 2010, what we see is kind of a change, and the gross capital or investment in the economy slows down quite rapidly. It's a slight positive in 2012, but from 2010, it's more than halved. Public sector investment increases significantly over this period, which implies that potentially the fall in private sector investment, which comes here, and it's almost kind of non-existent in 2011 and 2012, is the public sector is doing some spending to maintain the economy. So a big increase in the amount of public spending there. Within consumption, this is broadly maintained, so it's kind of stayed stable. 2010 dips a little bit, 2011 comes back up in 2012. But within this, the public sector, in terms of its current spending, starts to become less significant, and private consumption is kind of maintained at a steady-ish pace across there. A little bit of a dip in 2011, but most of them do dip, and then it bounces back a little bit. What's slightly more worrying is that the exports then are always smaller than the imports. So effectively, there would be a trade deficit on each of these years. And there's a significant slowdown in the growth of exports in relation to the growth of imports. When you look at the last column, it's kind of percentage of the economic growth. So it's already told you that the economic growth on average is over 6%. So you can see it in those 3 years, and these data above it show the percentage of the contribution to that 6.6, 6.5 and 6.7%. All 3 years show a trade deficit. However, the deficit is shrinking a little bit, but then it grows again in 2012. The amount of public sector spending as a percentage is about a little under a quarter of economic growth. You can see the slowdown in private sector investment, again mostly FDI, which it goes negative in 2011, and then it's only 0.4 in 2012. Again, public sector current spending is not very significant. The biggest contributor to aggregate demand in all these years is private consumption. So the thing that's keeping the Zambian economy growing at the rate it is its own population spending on goods and services. Now, part of that, though, is a negative because they are spending on imports as well. A lot of it is imported food, but also some energies. So there's a significant amount of negative spending on imports. And as the global economy slows and China's economy is slowing and the price of copper is falling, the exports from the markets are getting less. And the prices of copper tripled up until 2011. But even with that tripling in the price, the slowdown in the quantity has meant that even from 2010 to 2011, there's less significant exports. So it's a worsening position for Zambia after 2010. 2012 looks like it's improving marginally, but we know after this that things have got steadily worse for Zambia as well. So this extract is really looking at kind of the demand side and looking at positives on a rebalancing of their economy and looking more positively at attracting foreign direct investment and an export-led growth, but then that situation is kind of reversed and public sector spending is taking up some of the slack. But the trade deficit is making the situation worse, and there's a worrying trend in investment from the private sector and foreign direct investment.